the chat. So as we're going, hopefully this will be more interactive and not, I'm a professor, so I don't want to lecture because that sounds like it's not any fun anyway. So we'll talk through some ideas that we have and different things that we've been thinking about, and we will also want to hear from you. So I'm going to share my screen with those of you in Zoom. Super fancy. So welcome. I'm Rosemary Avance. I know on Zoom you can only see whoever is on the camera. I'm Rosemary. I'm Heather Stewart.
And I'm Richard Sylvester.
The three of us are currently working together on a fellowship with the Center for the Humanities. They have research group fellowships where people from various disciplines in the College of Arts and Sciences apply to participate and get put together with strangers. So we didn't know each other before this process. We were matched together because we have some similar interests in research and in methodologies and theoretical interests that aligned. And actually it's ended up being a really great process so far. So I encourage you to look into that if you're interested in some kind of a new intellectual exercise for your research.
27th.
Yeah. So yeah, the application process is really easy and it's online on the Center for the Humanities website. So if you're interested in that. So the three of us come from very different backgrounds and disciplines. We have a lot of overlap in our interests. I'm in the School of Media and Strategic Communication. I'm a professor of StratCom mostly, and I'm assistant professor. And I tend to work on things related to digital communities and identity from a kind of critical cultural perspective. I'm also doing some research right now on journalism and information flows in rural communities, which is slightly unrelated to my typical research, but overlaps because I'm using engagement, community engagement and qualitative methods in that research as well. So it's kind of a new area for me. Let's do these little introductions and then we'll go. I don't know if that's working, but there we go. Yep, there you go.
Great. Once again, I'm Heather. I'm in the Department of Philosophy, and I work primarily in ethics, applied ethics, specifically bioethics, and recently kind of data ethics, digital ethics, things pertaining to online speech and communication and so on.
Richard again. I'm with the English department. I'm focused on rhetoric and writing studies. I'm a PhD graduate student, so there are a range. It's for the Humanities Fellowship. It's been a really interesting process, and they've been really supportive, especially for graduate students being part of the different groups. So
yeah, the Center for the Humanities research groups are open to anyone. You don't have to be a faculty member to apply for those. And you also don't have to be in humanities per se. I'm in the social sciences. And so at first I wasn't sure if I should or could apply, but it's actually really nice to get to think about some questions that are outside of the typical social scientific framework. So we met strangers with these interests that we've just sort of told you about. And our first assignment was to kind of talk about ourselves long enough that we found some things in common that we would want to pursue as a unique research question or some type of research project. And the end result for these groups doesn't necessarily have to be original research or a publication. It can be presentations or creative explorations or community interventions, depending on what the subjects are and how things align. So the first time we met, I think we were talking about Be Real. We were all very interested in social media dynamics and how people portray their identities and interact and what like authenticity and engagement look like in those spaces, and questions of the ethics of how we share our information online. And then this happened. So this was last semester, and ChatGPT launched in November, and our group met for the first time, I think, in the beginning of November. And so then it seemed like a perfect kind of storm for us to jump into this as it was being first discussed. So how many of you have used ChatGPT? Okay, so not everyone. That's cool. Okay, that's helpful for us. And then online, can you put your hand up if you've used it? So not everybody. Okay, great. That's good. Well, I'm glad those of you who haven't used it are interested in finding out more. So I would love to talk to you a little bit about that. If you want to put in the chat what you're hoping to learn about or why you are interested in learning more, from the perspective of someone who hasn't used it, that'd be very helpful and interesting to me. But for us, so we're thinking about this project is, the first reaction most academics or in our circles, most of the people in philosophy and in communication, most of my colleagues' reactions and others in academia who are talking, or the first reaction is concern of plagiarism, because this is a way to generate original text that can't necessarily be traced. It is original. It's not an essay that's being written for multiple people and sold. It's generative text that's based completely on your unique prompt. And it's unique each time each time it's generated. So if multiple people enter the same prompt, it still will generate unique text responses for those people. The answers might be the same, but worded in different ways and organized in different ways. And so I'm in a writing discipline where one of the big things we do is teach students how to think critically and write their thoughts down in organized ways. And one of our major forms of assessment is writing. That was the first concern, and understandably so. But in today's session, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the concerns around using it, especially where it comes to where we might draw the line between using it as a tool and using it to do our work for us in ways that give people an unfair advantage or that promote intellectual dishonesty. But today we want to focus more on uses and ways that we might explore potential for implementing ChatGPT as a tool in teaching, in research, in even, in the academic industry, finding jobs and creating job language around job postings and application materials, which I know a lot of the registrants for this today are graduate students, which I was also recently, and I remember the process of applying for jobs and putting together all those packets is a full-time job in and of itself. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Hang on a minute, got a little. Okay, yeah, so we have a chat. Interested in using this to help with teaching and creative class materials. We will definitely be talking about that today. We're also going to be brainstorming through some uses like that. I also just want to mention briefly, since we are sponsored by the Center for the Humanities, that's who brought us together. We're having another conversation about ChatGPT this coming Friday at noon, and it's on Zoom. And anybody can register for this event too. The difference is in this, we're going to be exploring it more from our philosophical perspective and talking specifically about the ethics of this new kind of world that we're living in, where not just written assignments in academic setting, but things like our creative expressions as humans can now be difficult to tell if they're generated by a human or not. So we're going to be talking through a lot of those issues and just having a conversation in that space as well, if you're more interested in that kind of theoretical discussion. All right. Would you like to give us a little preview? A little preview of our contents.
Sure. Okay. No, you're fine.
What do you want me to do?
Okay, yeah, so our kind of goals and objectives for the day are as follows. So sorry if people in the room can't see me behind this. So we're going to introduce ChatGPT and sort of generative AI, of which it is a part. We're going to think through some pedagogical possibilities for ChatGPT, explore some uses of ChatGPT in creating original research, consider some ethical considerations and challenges that ChatGPT generates, and then collectively kind of think through together some potential productive uses of ChatGPT.
Yeah, so I thought maybe we could trade places and you could introduce what ChatGPT is for those who are here who haven't used it, and maybe do a few little examples. Switch. Sure. Sorry, it's a bit clunky with all of the moving parts here. Okay, so I know when we just asked who had sort of been exposed to ChatGPT before or used it, a couple hands in the room, a couple hands on Zoom. So maybe not everybody is super familiar with what this thing is. So ChatGPT is an artificial intelligence chatbot. So you can sort of ask it questions. We'll do some of that in a moment and get text generated response.
As we said, it was introduced in November 2022, so very recently, and the newest iteration of it, ChatGPT 4, just came out earlier this month. It's developed by a tech company called OpenAI. So ChatGPT is built on what's called large language models, and it's improved by reinforcement learning techniques. So you'll see when we open it up, when you ask ChatGPT a question, there will be a little thumbs up or thumbs down next to it. So you can sort of give feedback as you're going to say, this is a good answer, good job, or this is a not so good answer. And it implements that into the system as further training for the system. Okay, so what can ChatGPT do? And again, we'll see some examples in a moment. So it can mimic human conversation. In other words, it can chat about virtually anything you can think of, anything we could chat about together in this room, you can chat with ChatGPT about. Perhaps what, as Rosemary was saying, what academics have found kind of alarming is that it can pose original written material. So this can be essays, articles, screenplays, scripts, song lyrics, poems, any kind of written content that you can imagine on any topic. And it can do this in different tones or styles. So I can ask it to explain, I don't know, what's some concept.
Yeah. Explain ChatGPT for a 4-year-old.
For a 4-year-old, right? Or in different tones, like explain ChatGPT in an angry tone, or
like a surfer boy from California.
Like a surfer boy from California, or yeah, or in the form of a Taylor Swift song, or something like that. So you can have it communicate information to you in a way that mimics different styles, different tones, different people's kind of particular voices and ways of speaking, and so on. It can take tests. We'll say something about that in a minute. It's gotten quite good at this in the latest iteration. It can write and sort of fix corrupted computer code, and many, many more things that it can do. So how does this thing work? So there's the free sort of test version, which is what we will be using today, because as far as I understand, none of us are yet paying for the subscription version of ChatGPT, which is the sort of more enhanced version. When you're signing up, you're accepting the terms and conditions, which do say that you are effectively a guinea pig. You are giving information that's going to go back into the system and feed into it to try to improve it and make it better. So again, you can ask questions, you can give commands, you can give it instructions to do particular things or to create particular kinds of content. And what it does is it draws on all of that input training data to then make statistical predictions about what the next words in the sequence should be. So like a very rudimentary version of this, if I put in, finish this sentence, twinkle, twinkle, it might say little star or something like that. And then again, the user can provide feedback about the quality of the answer. If I put in twinkle, twinkle, and it says red car, I might give it a thumbs down. And then next time it'll know, okay, that's not what you wanted something else. And maybe next time it finds the right answer for me. Okay. So when you log into the system, perhaps ironically, as we've talked about, the first thing that you have to do is verify that you are a human, which feels a bit unfair, but I have to tell this non-human that I am in fact a human in order to get into the system. And then on the sort of landing page, it gives you some examples of what you can do with it, a sense of what kind of capabilities it has, and it does indicate a few of its own limitations. I know the folks, I don't know how to make it so people on Zoom can actually like see the.
I think it should be sharing the screen.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Oh, brilliant.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
When you switch tabs, they'll be able to see the.
Oh, that's glorious. Okay. Good. Okay. So sorry, I thought you couldn't see the screen. So some examples: explain quantum computing in simple terms. Got any creative ideas for a 10-year-old's birthday? How do I make an HTTP request in JavaScript? So some examples. It has some things about the capabilities, and then if you look in the last column, some things about the limitations. It may occasionally, we might think occasionally is kind of loose there. It may occasionally, perhaps frequently, generate incorrect information. It may occasionally, again, scare quotes around occasionally, produce harmful instructions or biased content. And it has limited knowledge of world events after 2021, because that's where the sort of training input data ends. So we've just put a few examples here again, in case you haven't really played around with this. So the first one, just write a 100-word essay explaining, I'm a philosophy professor, explaining the Kantian ethical position that lying is morally impermissible.
And it does that and does a decent enough job. It certainly does a job of like, if this was on a high school short answer exam, it would probably pass. Okay, same kind of thing. Explain the plot of the film Citizen Kane to a 6-year-old. Does a pretty good job at the level a 6-year-old would sort of understand the film. Okay, and then just for fun, can you write a poem about 3 researchers at Oklahoma State University leading a library session about how to use ChatGPT in academia for teaching and research? So 3 researchers at OSU instructed a group, not a few, on how to use ChatGPT for teaching and research. You see, sorry, someone in the chat said, can you put the PowerPoint in presentation mode to enlarge the text?
Yeah.
I don't know if I know how to do this.
You can do it. It makes it a little harder to toggle back and forth, which is. Okay, this is, okay, so all of us are PC users and this is Dell.
We're all Mac users.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I meant. I was just so flustered. I don't know how to do it. Okay.
It's over here.
Yes, okay, it's different on my computer, I swear. Okay.
Okay, so, okay, our poem. 3 researchers at OSU instructed a group, not a few, on how to use ChatGPT for teaching and research. You see, the library session was grand as they shared insights firsthand on how to harness AI's power to make learning and research flower. Students and faculty alike marveled at the things they could spike in their studies, from new perspectives to insights so unexpected. With ChatGPT as their guide, their research soared, reaching new heights. The 3 researchers at OSU left their audience with something new, a newfound knowledge they now possessed to use ChatGPT at its best for their academic pursuits, and they journeyed through their roots.
That's a weird ending.
Yeah, it was a weird ending.
I
Yeah.
think it's interesting when you just ask it for a poem with no other context about itself. It's going towards the extremely positive promotional tone and not just kind of a neutral tone.
Yeah, it's very
That's how this is gonna
heroic.
go.
And then just really for fun, because I like to do things in the style of Dr. Seuss, 3 researchers from OSU led a library session, it's true, on how to use ChatGPT for research and teaching, fancy and free. They showed the students and faculty too how to use AI and all they do for research questions and writing too, to find new knowledge through and through. With ChatGPT as their guide, their work soared high, no need to hide. The 3 researchers, oh, what a ride, left their audience feeling so satisfied. Oh, the things you can learn with ChatGPT at every turn, from data analysis to writing prose, AI has brought new opportunities, who knows? The 3 researchers from OSU showed us how with ChatGPT we can pursue new knowledge and insights, oh so new. Thanks to them, our research will never be through.
That's ominous at the end a little
Yeah.
bit, I think.
Okay. I actually just realized I don't know how to do this.
How to
I'm so
exit?
bad at technology. Okay. So
Be able to tab over. Let's see.
I don't want to touch anything,
Sorry.
break it. No, you're
There
good.
you go.
Okay. So for someone who has never played with this before, either in the chat or in the room, does somebody want to just give us some sort of prompt, like something from your discipline that you're interested in? Yeah.
Not a prompt, but if you hit control and then plus, it should make it all bigger.
Or yeah,
Zoom it in a little.
control and wheel up.
Like this. Hopefully that's helpful to the in Zoom. Yeah, good. Does somebody have a prompt that they want to try? Like if there's something, if you teach, if there's something you might ask on one of your exams or.
The first thing I did when I learned about this was, because I teach a lot of first-year composition, being a graduate student in English, I went home and fed it a prompt from the 1113, the kind of baseline model of the course for one of the essays, and it worked really well. So.
Okay, so Shannon in the chat wants ChatGPT to write a limerick about college students who get caught cheating, which is kind of fun. Okay. It's thinking, harnessing all of its creative potential. Actually, it is like thinking longer than it usually thinks.
Well, we're not using the paid version. so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is interesting too, that
During
this is
business
like,
hours, it's always slower during this. That's why we put so many screenshots of output in the presentation, because
in
it's
case.
unreliable. If you're not a paid member, the access to it is not consistent. Sometimes it'll say there's too many users right now, try again later, or give you another error message. I'm a little
It's funny
nervous.
now-
You never know. Sometimes it goes like
I feel like
unexpectedly dark.
I'm ChatGPT now, and I'm trying to predict the next sentence
Yeah.
based on like what I know about language.
A big bye. A big bye. Bye.
Okay.
So it's
So-
Gen Z apparently.
There once were some college students so sly who thought that cheating was worth a try, but their scheme was uncovered and they were soon discovered, and now their grades have taken a great big bye. Okay. We'll do one more of these. Write a 500-word personal statement for an application. If 500 word.
So I find when you ask it something specific like that, because I've done this with a word count, it's bad at counting words and things like that. So it's unreliable. You would have to actually copy and paste it into something and look at the word count or do it manually to make sure that it was, if you needed it to be exactly a 500 words. I've tried using it for counting instances of a word in a block of text, and it's not always reliable. That's the thing about it. It tells you it may generate incorrect information. So the problem with that is you don't know when it's doing that. So it's like if you had a big plate of chocolate chip cookies and they were all fine except one had a little poison in it or a little manure in it or something terrible. Like you don't know which one it is until it's too late. So it's the same with the information that comes out. It's often it sounds convincing or it sounds correct or it looks like it did what you asked it to do. And if you don't dig deeper into it, you wouldn't know otherwise. Oh, wow.
Okay, so we're getting our personal anecdote.
Yeah. One of the first things people said when this came out, people like to have all kinds of very predictable reactions to new technology. And one of them is always, it won't be able to replace humans because we have that special spark of something. And it usually comes back to this kind of unnameable quality, you know, the spirit or, you know, the emotional capacity of humans. And it's getting better at that. So if you were to compare this response to when it first came out, or then the second or third iteration, when it had a lot of content controls put on it, I'm sure you would see a trajectory of increased believability that it could come from an actual person or that it describes an emotional state correctly.
Okay, so this was Valerie's suggestion in the chat, but you can see that it's writing us a little personal statement for an application for a master's program in speech language pathology that has this kind of narrative of personal growth. So you can see it doing that. Yeah, so someone in the chat said it just concerned that ChatGPT can be used to write personal statements for grad school applications.
It will.
Yeah,
It
certainly will.
And I'm sure it's being used for that purpose now. So yes.
And I just reviewed grad applications to my own department, and you know, who knows,
It's
right?
interesting because, you know, a lot of people have talked about concerns with plagiarism and Turnitin sent an email last week. If you use Turnitin, you probably saw the email update that says that they're integrating a plagiarism checker for AI, and they're rolling that out in the beginning of April. So I haven't ever thought about like plagiarism checking application materials, but now that's a new concern too. You might be thinking about how you might look at them that way. There's a whole bunch of other issues with that we can talk about, and some of them we'll get into about equity related to using ChatGPT. So, you know, if someone comes from a disadvantaged background, or maybe English is in their second language, and they utilize a tool like this to help them craft these materials, the ethical line there is really blurry, where it goes from being your work to not your work anymore. The more detailed your prompt, the more specific the response will be, and the more it will sound like something you actually wrote. So that's definitely a concern that we all share.
And just two quick observations from the chat. Valerie had said, with respect to that personal statement, better than many real ones.
Yeah.
And formulaic,
Yeah.
just like the real ones, which is interesting. And Jenny said in the chat, Clark and I looked at ChatGPT's suggestions for Dewey numbers on a book about trade in ancient Rome. Its suggestions weren't bad, but its explanations for its choices were wrong and could lead users astray, which is really interesting because, right, when Rosemary was saying, like, what's the thing that humans still have sort of an advantage over? Well, it's having understanding of why we're making particular choices or why other people are. So I think that's a really good point. Okay.
Yeah.
Trade-off.
Yeah.
Who's up next?
Go ahead.
Let's see. So it's like what we were talking about before. November 30th, I believe, was when the first iteration went live, you know, beta free version. And everybody started using it, and we had our meeting. I think it was like a week after that. It was like December 6th or something like that. That we met up at a coffee shop, and I hadn't even heard of it at that point. They're like, have you heard about this ChatGPT thing? And we started looking at it, and here we are in March, and I have seen articles from pretty much every major popular news outlet. There are now statements in academic journals about using ChatGPT and generative AI and listing them as co-authors or not, or if they are even accepted. There have been problems with the university that put out a "we're sorry that this horrible thing happens" generated by ChatGPT. So they got in trouble for not even bothering to write a response. So this is moving very quickly. So we've got a paid version for the newer ones, which allows easier access. Like we got at the end there for the personal statement, there was the network error. You're going to see that a lot less with the paid version, of course. So I have the kind of capitalistic model over it, which raises other ethical questions that we can think about later on, as far as who has access, who gets to use it, and who gets to have those paid versions, right? But there are enhanced capabilities. There are, I don't know if it's out yet. I haven't looked at the fourth version because, like I said, I'm a grad student too, so I've been busy with the image. Is that already out, or is that still coming?
Dolly, yeah.
Well, Dolly, yeah, that's
No,
been out, but for the ChatGPT versions.
Yeah, so it's multimodal in that you can input images and have it generate text, for example, in response. So you could put in an image and say like, what's wrong with this? Or what's funny about this? Or here's a picture of the inside of my fridge. What can I make with these items? That kind of thing. So it's multimodal in that it can give you answers about image input. And you could think in academic context why this might be interesting, because if I'm taking an art history class as a freshman because I need a gen ed credit and I need to write, an analysis of a painting, well, I can shoot the painting into ChatGPT 4 and it can give me, an analysis within certain parameters of that art. So now it's not just text input, it's also able to respond to image input as well.
Yeah, just to add that, so these collaborations, some of these are, it's open source right now. The foundation that started this was originally nonprofit. Now they're starting to sell things and have paid models. I don't understand the business model of that, but any kind of developer can utilize an extension to ChatGPT to make what they do faster. So companies can do, their chatbots can be more streamlined to go with this. I've seen it in, I don't know if any of you are into like genetic analysis, but if you have a website that has access to, for example, your human genetic information, you can chat with this bot about analyzing different aspects of your own DNA, and it can interpret those results for you in a way that, honestly, I've been through this process with diagnostics with genetic disorders, and some genetic counselors can't do what it can do because there's no way for a human to hold that kind of knowledge in their head about the entire human genome. So it does some things that are really outrageous like that. And potential for misinformation there could be like extremely problematic. I don't know, it could have potential medical effects on people's lives and, decisions people might make about themselves or reproduction or about end of life decisions based on genetic health information that it's interpreting. And that it's really hard to fact check that kind of information because it's about your genetic code. So some of those extensions, you'll see them everywhere. It'll just say in the corner, powered by ChatGPT or powered by OpenAI. And that's an indicator that it's using this large language model to generate the responses it's giving you. And all of those responses then fall under those warnings that you saw when we first logged on, which are, it may be false, it may be biased. And anything you put in, you're sharing with us for our use in language generation in the future. So your prompt itself is information that it's now putting into its own algorithm to use later. If you want to hit the slides.
Okay. We can go ahead and skip that. So just what the other slide was saying, a few of the things that are kind of relevant again in a sort of academic context, maybe for student use, are the following. So Sorry, I keep seeing the things in the chat and getting distracted. Anyhow, too many screens, bad for my brain. So one thing is this partnership with Duolingo to have enhanced sort of language learning that's powered by ChatGPT 4. So Duolingo says, we believe that AI and education make a great duo, and we've leveraged AI to help us deliver highly personalized language lessons, affordable and accessible English proficiency testing, and more. Our mission is to make high quality education available to everyone in the world, made possible by advanced AI. So we're going to say some things a bit later about some of the sort of equity risk and equity potential, but right, this seems one way to kind of leverage this technology to help make language learning perhaps more accessible. And then similarly, Khan Academy, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with, a similar kind of partnership. So the CEO of Khan Academy has written a number of pieces saying we shouldn't be sort of shying away from using this in sort of academic context, but we should be leveraging it to try to, again, have these kind of equity benefits for things like tutoring students. So Khan Academy has this idea for this partnership with ChatGPT 4. So harnessing GPT-4 so that all students benefit. And if you look at the second column, some examples of things that can tutor students, things like helping them figure out math problems, helping them sort of write a story together with this back and forth kind of conversational style, AP exam prep, learning vocabulary words, learning computer programming, interviewing historical figures, right? So I don't need to just read about who Abraham Lincoln was, I can have a chat with him. Or debating topics back and forth.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, you can do those things without Khan Academy, just using the app itself. But this is a structured way for kids to be able to use it. So instead of having to figure out what type of a prompt they might need to input, they can select from options, and it just streamlines the process. And this is actually super useful, not just for kids or for students, but in terms of practicing and prepping for tests and getting feedback on your work in a conversational format. That's actually super helpful for me or anyone, whatever it is you're trying to learn. So that can be a generative process there too. It just makes it a little easier.
Yeah, and then the thing that kind of has been getting a ton of buzz, if you're somebody that spends a lot of time looking at tech news or listening to tech people be interviewed on podcasts, is just the massive leap in the ability of ChatGPT to perform on a number of different tests that we're probably all familiar with. If you'll hit the next slide. So if you can see this, little table here, the left column is the most recent iteration, GPT-4. So you can see how much it's improved on these tests, on its ability to perform on these tests relative to the previous iteration. So if you look at the bar exam, it can now score in the 90th percentile compared to the 10th. And if we're thinking again about the development between what was released in November of 2022 and March 2023, that's incredibly fast to be able to make that kind of jump in the ability to perform in these ways. If you look at the LSAT, similar kind of thing.
So I think the gut reaction for a lot of places is to make access to things like this more difficult because of the implications for plagiarism and for equity across the different aspects of what we do here. But you can't really tell when something's been written using this, or there are ways around that. So there are lots of different online sites that claim to be able to check whether something has been generated by either ChatGPT or one of its competitors. And sometimes they're right. The problem is they report with a level of surety, like they'll say this is 80% likely to have been generated by AI. Well, what am I going to do? Like, that's not beyond a shadow of a doubt if I'm going to be accusing someone of something. And it's also very difficult to be able to pinpoint exactly what about it is artificial. The other thing is that a clever student can easily use those tools themselves because they're not something that you have to have like a teaching degree to be able to access. Anybody can go and put their own output into a checker and see what it says, and then change it a few times until it no longer says that it's written by ChatGPT. I'm talking about these things openly. Well, in the back of my head, I'm hearing a little voice saying, I'm telling them how to cheat, which is why I think a lot of us are not talking about it in our departments. I don't know about you all, but this is not a conversation that we're having at a large scale across the university or across our departments for the most part. And so part of the problem is we're afraid, I think, I feel it, because I feel it right now, that like if we talk about the problems with it, that people will take advantage of those loopholes. But the problem is people are going to do that anyway. This is a discussion. If you go on Reddit and you go look at the college subreddit or OkState subreddit and search for ChatGPT, they are already talking about how to get around it and what to do and how to use it and different ways of using it. And so we can pretend like that's not happening, but it'd be better to talk about what we can do with it instead of how we can get rid of it, or ways that we can assess student learning that are not totally dependent on generating text that could be easily done this way.
Ignore it and it'll go away. Never
Yeah,
works.
yeah. And it's hard, like it's hard enough to follow check plagiarism and turn it in that does it for me. Because then I have to go through each individual student's paper and look at the percentages and then see if it's justified in the report. And that takes me a lot of time. So this is even more difficult to be able to monitor. But I think beyond that, like beyond the fact that it's hard to do and not really productive use of our time to try to ban it, this is not going away. Like this is the way we're going to be doing things. And you know, just like some people were slow to adopt a smartphone, myself, like 10 years later, I also didn't wear skinny jeans until they had been cool for 10 years. So that's weird. I'm just like a slow adopter. But if we wait to adopt this, we get behind in what we're doing and in industries that are related to this. So I'm teaching students who are going to go into PR and advertising and journalism. And if I'm not teaching them how to use this tool to help them in an ethical and responsible way, then I'm setting them up for failure on the job market and beyond, because they won't be competitive with everyone else that's using it. So that's not just true in industry, that's true for us here. This is also an industry, and we are all in the same market with other people at other universities and other researchers. Even though we don't think of it as a competitive environment, we're still working against a standard, like what's normal for our productivity. And so as that bar changes, because people are using this to create content, we have to be aware of what that is and how our norms are shifting within our own industries and our own departmental norms. So yeah, not going anywhere is the answer.
So what do you think are some ways this could be used in your classes here at OSU?
Yeah, just thinking through it, has anything come to mind, like ways that students may be using it or ways that instructors could use it or anything related? We're going to talk through some ideas that we have, but I think we have so much. I looked through all of the different fields that are represented in the chat box and among our participants, and there's so much more collective knowledge here. What do you all think? Anything come to mind? Yeah. Brainstorming. Mm-hmm.
I'm in the business analysis program. So a lot of what I'm interested in doing is creating graphs and moving those to business people. So if you see a really big spike on a certain day, I've never used it before, but assuming it would know if there's a big global event that day or a sale that day or something.
Yeah, that's one of the current major limitations of ChatGPT, is that it's trained on data up till 2021. So if you ask it why the stock market crashed, it'll tell you, but it'll make it up based on what it thinks is the most likely answer that sounds feasible. And it does that all the time. Like you could ask it, why Barack Obama was arrested. He wasn't. I'm not spreading rumors, but you could ask it why he was, and it would either say, I'm sorry, I don't have the information, or it would say, he was arrested for some documents that were found in his car. Like, and that's totally made up. But that's kind of where we're at right now with it. It's going to get to that point where it's going to be able to analyze news and current events, because it just needs to be connected to the internet. And right now it's not for safety reasons. It's like a guardrail that's put in place. With access to the internet, it can be more easily used for political misinformation or election tampering. It can also be like, it has potential to connect to any online system if it's online. So it could like rob a bank and like give me all the money if I'm a smart person that knows how to put in a prompt that could get it to do that. So you have to, there's a lot of guardrails that are slowly being raised, and we don't know like exactly at what speed that'll happen. But
so on the chat here, Udaya said, I will be careful. ChatGPT makes things up as it goes. I've had many examples of citing things that are not true, which we were just talking about.
It makes up sources, and they sound like feasible. Like if you ask it to cite the main scholars in your own field, like it knows usually their names because if they were around before 2021, but it'll credit them with things that they didn't necessarily
Like made up
say,
paper titles.
because it sounds like something they would say,
Yeah.
which is fun.
Faisal says it can act as a private tutor to help with
Mm-hmm.
my doubts. Absolutely. And that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit
Mhm.
later. Chuck says Bing and Google's chat AI programs both incorrectly stated that they had been shut down based on a satirical blog post saying that they had been shut down. So not being able to differentiate between satire and
Yeah.
satirical information versus actual information.
Tornadoes in American culture, that is a cool class. Somebody in the chat said they teach a class on tornadoes and they asked ChatGPT to write an analysis of the movie Twister, also classic, through the lens of gender, as it essentialized gender and attributed qualities to characters that they didn't really exhibit. That's interesting. Yeah. So
I thought it might be a good classroom activity to have
Mhm.
students critique ChatGPT's
Yeah.
analysis. That was something that we're going to talk about too. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Identifying examples from the film that contradict its oversimplifying take, and to think
Mm-hmm.
in a meta way about what it means that ChatGPT reads the film in that way. It's an
So
excellent point.
absolutely, if anyone is doing, and this is something I do a lot in my classes, we'll do ethical analysis of advertisements, for example. So anything you do that's about like analyzing public opinion on topics or cultural norms or stereotypes or anything like that, it's great at that because all it's doing is amalgamating the knowledge that it found on the internet. So if there's a bias in culture, then that means
There's no bias on the internet.
so any bias that exists, whether that bias is toward white Western English speaking countries or towards males or towards like gender roles or any biases that exist in society will come through if you ask it to just tell you facts about things, because it's the facts it's giving you are the slanted facts that are slanted in favor of whatever perceptions are the norm or the majority
Mhm.
and that are online. So that doesn't necessarily, it's going to reflect like the political opinions of the majority of people, for example. It's the political and other opinions and content that exists on the internet, which is not necessarily reflecting the people. So not everyone posts their stuff online. So the vocal minority often comes through in things like this. And I don't know for how that would look in terms of the gender analysis of Twister, but I can imagine it. It also has, it's not just a neutral interpreter of data either. So it started out that way where it would just say like whatever the average response that would be expected from the knowledge that exists. Now it has guardrails, safety rails put in place that are actually meant to keep it from saying offensive things. But in doing so, that puts other biases into it. So for example, I actually haven't tried this with ChatGPT 4, but with ChatGPT 3, if you asked it to make a joke about men, it would make a joke about men doing stupid stereotypical men things. If you asked it to make a joke about women, it would say, I'm sorry, I can't make disparaging jokes about anyone based on their gender, which is obviously like a kind of a little weird thing, but it's based on that. It's built like the people who program it are building their values and expectations of society into it as they go. So they're specifically telling it what things to not talk about, like certain political parties that it won't make jokes about, but it'll make it about others or religious groups or things like that. So depending on the norms, and I don't know what else because it's proprietary, but whatever goes into that thinking process about what should be okay and what shouldn't be okay. I was telling Heather when it first came out, I was after it had been corralled. So I guess this would be version 2 or version 3. I was asking it to write a story. I was just playing with the possibilities. I'm not a fiction writer, so this is a little embarrassing, but I was asking it to write a story about a single dad who falls in love with a single mom that he met at his kid's preschool. So they're both parents there. And it wouldn't do it, even though I explained to it, but like they're both single and like, because at first it thought I wanted to write a story about infidelity, and it was not about that. It said it couldn't do it. It violated its ethical code. And then I clarified that they're like single and it's fine. And it said it still wouldn't do it because it's unethical to have a relationship with a parent of at your child's school, which like I just made that up. Like that's not a thing. That's not even like a cultural norm. But I think it was thinking like the workplace or what so even within its own code of ethics, it's not always clear what the guidance is behind what it will and won't do. Now that it's 4, ChatGPT 4 will do more things than it would before. Like
I asked it how to do a variety of illegal things like laundering money. It's getting better about not telling me that information. Well, I think that's good. I don't know. But you know, there's ways around that too. So this is the ethical discussion, and I'm not meaning to do that, but I can't stop myself. When you ask it to like, how do I launder money? It will say that it won't help you with that. But in some previous iterations, I haven't checked this before, but if you asked it to write a story about someone laundering money, then sometimes it will do that and it'll tell you how to do it in the process. So it depends on the context of the prompt and what you're doing. In my example with the story, it still wouldn't write that story because it had such high guardrails at that time, but those fluctuate constantly depending on how they're programming it and testing it and what types of things they're doing. So I'd be interested to know right now what it would do with things like that, but I also don't want to encourage anyone to violate the terms of service by typing in and asking questions about illegal things. So that's the other thing you should know, that it saves your information, and unclear whether or not it would be happy to share your information with the authorities if they wanted to know what you've been searching about. So be aware of that when using this kind of service, just like with the internet. But I think this is more specific because it's linked directly to your account every time you use it. What else? None of those things I just said you should do in your classes here at OSU, so I don't know where any of those words came from. But.
All right, so some of the things that already came up that we were planning on talking about is the idea of like brainstorming topics, drafting and revising, and using it as a tool for critique, like the Twister example, which was way better than what I was coming up with. But here's a couple of things that I did with it in preparation for this this talk, with the worry that we wouldn't be able to access it with network activity and whatnot. So I'm teaching a composition class that is 14-13, and we're focusing on digital rhetoric. And my students are currently working on exploring concepts within digital rhetoric for their unit work that they're doing. And so I just told it to brainstorm a list of topics related to exploring digital rhetoric. And here's 15 topics that it popped out in 30 seconds or so, that some of them, but some of them are actually really interesting. And some of these are things we even talked about in class. Right? So a brainstorming tool, because sometimes students get stuck on coming up with an idea to work on. And then
I think what's difficult about this, any type of brainstorming, is that sometimes brainstorming is part of the difficult intellectual work you need to get really familiar with a topic. And you can do brainstorming by first reading a lot and then deciding what area you want to do. It's also like this kind of brainstorming is not addressing like our role as researchers, filling intellectual gaps that exist in existing studies and literature. And so this, I think, is a really good way for students to get an idea of like the breadth of things that they could talk about in their papers and projects. I know my students always get stuck on like just picking a topic for a speech or something like that. So it could sometimes be useful. I've been telling my students that they can use it sometimes, but that we want to brainstorm with our brain, and then we want to like outsource that work if we need to, or in certain circumstances. And that's really hard to navigate the boundaries up for me in my classes. I want them to be creative and do something that they care about and not just like pick up a list.
Yeah. Then, you know, sometimes though, when people get stuck, right?
I mean, I use it for brainstorming too. So
yeah,
it depends. And I don't know how to legislate like to my students what isn't a good way to do that.
What I'll do in classes that I teach is I do journal prompts here and there. And if I want them to do some brainstorming specifically for getting, you know, engaging and thinking about a topic and whatnot, I'll have them do that in class as a journal topic. And then this might be a supplement to, you know, like, okay, so let's take a look and see what this does. Did you think about these, or how does this fit into our conversation, or how, you know, do any of these look particularly interesting based on what you were thinking about before? And so there's definitely a way to incorporate that idea of brainstorming into the actual, you know, embodied manual labor of brainstorming, right? Here's another one. So this was, I took off of a paper that I'm currently working on, like, and I say working on in air quotes. This was the very first rough draft of the first paragraph that I have not touched. It was like, ooh, I have an idea, which I tell my students to do all the time. Get your idea out on paper. It doesn't matter. It's for you, nobody else. I'm sharing this one, but I'm a teacher. I'm used to that. So this is what I wrote as an introductory paragraph to a book review that I'm doing in my African American rhetorics class. It was just an idea that I had. This particular concept came up multiple times in this book that I'm reading, and I thought this would be a really interesting way to start off this particular review. And so I thought that for this presentation, why don't I just put this in? This is what I told ChatGPT. How can I revise this introductory paragraph? Left it very general, just like, how do I revise this? I'm not saying revise for a specific way or a specific style guide or anything like that. Just revise it. And this is what it came out with. The concept of oscillation, defined as the repetitive or periodic variation of some measure about a central value or between two or more different states, is central to Sami Schalk's book, Body Minds Reimagined. Schalk explores the interplay between various ideas that oscillate between two values, states, or concepts, such as ability and disability, past and future, and sex and gender, among others. However, Schalk's interest in oscillation extends beyond the two extremes around the central point. Instead, the movement itself is of particular interest to Schalk as she examines the entire process and movement that makes these concepts not a binary, but a process in and of themselves. That's a pretty long sentence that I'd want to break up in revision. For example, the oscillation between disability and ability is not just two separate states, but the interaction of both that continually defines and redefines itself in each new context in which the oscillation occurs. Thus, the concept of oscillation is dynamic and constantly evolving.
Do you like it better?
Parts of it.
I feel like it's dry.
It is a little dry.
Yours
There are a
felt-
couple of parts though that I kind of like the way that it revised it more
It
than
seems more
mine.
concise,
Mhm.
but it feels dry.
Yeah.
This is somebody who has no idea what any of that is talking about. I think that's really interesting use for that. And I know a lot of us, if you're doing research and work and you're having to do revisions, our students have to do that too when they have a draft and they need to write it again.
Mhm.
But I'm currently revising a book for publication, and although I wouldn't want it to rewrite my words, one thing it's really good at is rewriting the style. Like if the publisher publishes an APA and you wrote it for MLA style, you can redo it. You're going to still need to go through and check it every single place and read it, but that eliminates some of that manual work of having to do it. And I think that's a good use of it because those things are arbitrary.
I told it when I
It's
was prepping for this, I gave it a sentence and said, correct this using APA 7th style guide.
Yep.
And it first kind of freaked out and said, APA is for citation. But I think you want me to do this, which is what I told it to do anyway, and then it did it. So it's
That's
still
funny.
a little odd on how it responds sometimes. But there's definitely some interesting aspects that you can use this for, right? Tutoring, I put in the prompt, explain the use of a semicolon using APA 7th edition style guide. So according to APA 7th edition style guide, semicolons can be used in several ways. Here's 1, here's 2, here's 3. It's important to note that semicolons should be used sparingly and only when they serve a clear purpose. Additionally, in APA style, semicolons should be followed by a lowercase letter unless the word after the semicolon is a proper noun. So you can use it for tutoring on particular concepts that you might be having trouble with.
Yeah, and if you wanted to use something like this for your students and have them do this like as a requirement. So for example, sometimes when my students do a paper and it really is in bad shape, I'll tell them they have to go to the writing center and get them to sign off before they can turn it in again. So if you wanted to use this in that kind of way, instead of just giving it a prompt, you could require certain kinds of things from a student too, like ask it a question, then you have to keep talking to it until you get it right. Like you have to ask it, okay, so is this the correct use of semicolons? And then do it yourself and then have it critique you and back and forth a few times. I think, like, for example, my students struggle with passive voice. Like they cannot figure out what is active voice and what is passive voice. And they're supposed to be using active voice, but they always love passive voice. And so I can imagine them asking it to explain passive voice and then asking it if, help me understand why this sentence is in passive voice, and then put in a sentence from their paper that I've marked as being passive voice. And then they could go back and forth a few times. I can do that work too if they'll come to my office hours, but
Students don't come to
but that's like
hours.
2% of them that do that. And so it
Could require, and
could
like that they
be-
print it out
yeah,
and
yeah.
submit it.
have
with
them
their comment.
screenshot their conversation with ChatGPT instead of having the writing center sign off on it, or do both.
Not that we want the writing center people. to
Yeah,
use
no, I
work.
think it's a great
tool that's more accessible to a lot of students might help get students to actually get that kind of feedback because it's impersonal. It's not a person critiquing them, but it's a different kind of feedback than they would get if they went to the writing center.
Yeah, for sure.
So I have one question.
Uh-huh.
If we use ChatGPT to revise or improve the grammar, so won't it be considered as plagiarism? Because
So,
they will change
yeah.
certain words and even rephrase the sentence.
Yeah. That's a really important question. I think two things. If you're a student in a class and you want to use ChatGPT for a purpose like that, talk to your professor because it could vary according to their expectations for you. So in some classes where the goal of the class is the writing style and structure, then I could see that being considered really not a great idea. I've had classes where I've told my students I didn't want them to have their peers edit their work or look at their work because I want to see what their work looks like. So you should definitely find out from your instructor. If the goal of the assignment is to communicate your understanding of a topic, that could be different because if the goal is not your writing quality, then, you know, having the use of a revision like this would be very similar to having a peer help you read through it or having, you know, going to the writing center and asking them to help you find areas to revise. So I would always ask. That being said, it depends. But if you're starting with your original content and you've written an essay, the entire thing, and you put it in and ask it to help correct grammar and English language errors or something like that, I would probably ask my students to show me both of them because I would want to know what areas they still needed help. I wouldn't want your English language learning or grammar learning to stop because now there's a tool. I want to be sure that you would still be learning what those errors are so you can prove them yourself. But in my classes, I would welcome that for international students, especially because I have a lot of students that, I mean, they're already doing so much work to be bilingual that it seems sometimes unfair that we're expecting them to also then be able to do, you know, these other things that some of my English native students can't do well. So I would talk to your instructor to make sure the expectations are clear. In terms of publishing, absolutely use tools to help you improve your English, like Grammarly or this or a tutor, because people are doing that anyway. They're paying to have people help them. And that this is that, but free. If you're already doing the intellectual work of the writing. And if the thing you're doing isn't about the writing, like poetry or something like that, but like if you're trying to get your knowledge into the world or your research, communicate your research to the world, I think absolutely this is a fair tool to use to help you with that.
So my question was also not our class, but our writing a paper at publishing. So
Yeah.
So if we revise and submit a paper, like would the online tool like detect it's from ChatGPT or something like that?
Ooh, that's a good question, and it depends. And I don't know. It would depend on the tool. If you asked it to rewrite your paper, then probably it would look, because it would be the style like all these other things, and that ChatGPT itself embeds a watermark, so it can detect its own kind of content. The watermark is like digital things that are more complex than what I'm about to say, but similar to like if every seventh letter was an A, then I would be able to tell that I wrote that myself. So it's kind of like a code that's built into it. It's much more complex than that. But that's so if you had it rewrite everything, what you could do instead would be to ask it to identify every error or ask it to identify every sentence that needs restructuring. And then when it's done that work, then you go through yourself and fix those things so that the rest of it's still in your voice. And that I think also helps to maintain in writing, in fields where the quality of writing itself is part of what you're being evaluated on. That is another use you could do, you know, like I wrote this, but I need help to improve if I'm using punctuation wrong or if I'm, you know.
Right, which brings up a question that was in the chat. Let me scroll up. Hassan says, who owns the information we feed to the AI as we are using it to revise our work? The AI will use it for others. There should be an option to have the PI asking us, can I use this information for others or not? Right.
For you to ask.
To ask the user inputting it to say,
yeah, no, there's no option.
Or not, but
no, when you opt into using it, you are forfeiting the right to do that. So I wouldn't use it if you want to.
This is what ChatGPT provided for an answer. The ownership of the information you feed to an AI language model may depend on various factors, such as the terms and conditions of service provider the purpose of the AI model, and the jurisdiction in which you are located in general. When using AI language model, you are providing your data and information to the service provider,
Yeah.
who may use it to improve their model's performance or for other purposes.
Which is also the terms and conditions of Google and Facebook and Instagram and all the things.
You know, that's the
So-
thing that we all read every time and then click.
And
So-
yeah, so I'm not saying that that's not a concern, because it's a huge concern. But it's also not clear that it's directly going to do anything with that. It could legally, like they could use that information for whatever purpose, as long as it's within the bounds of their terms and conditions. But what it's doing is amalgamating that information. So if you put in an essay you wrote about a topic, now that's part of the knowledge that it has to draw from. So it would do that without giving you credit for it. And so I mean, that's all it is. If you think about it in the most technical terms, like ChatGPT is a giant plagiarism machine. It pulls from all the knowledge that exists without citing any of it. So,
Right.
yeah.
So it kind of comes down for your question is, how are you using it? Are you using it to help you find the errors, to help you improve your own work, or are you using it to do that work? Right. And that's kind of a big distinction. And there's no necessarily like safeguards built in for that. That's how you're using the tool.
Yeah.
And I think
Right.
it's gonna be on us, like, in different industries and academia, to establish what those norms are and what we think they ought to be based on kind of what our values are.
Right.
Mhm.
Because this is certainly gonna be like an evolving conversation, right? Like, how much can this do before we say this is not my original work, right? Whether I'm a student or I'm a researcher who, it's supposed to be an original publication. So I think that's very much gonna be an evolving conversation that
Yeah.
like we ought to be having and figure out how to do well so that we
Yeah.
know what we expect from our students, but what we expect from our researchers as well.
I think transparency and talking to your instructor or talking to the journal that you're publishing in, so that they're aware of to the extent to which this was utilized.
Right.
That's going to be important for establishing those ethical boundaries.
Right. And journals are already putting disclaimers and information about the use of ChatGPT on their submission pages.
Yeah.
So that's already starting to
Yeah,
pop up.
Sarah makes a really important point. It's not always accurate when identifying active and passive voice in the example I gave it. So there may still be some issues there, and that's absolutely true. And I would recommend, if you're going to use it for something like that example or the semicolons or something like that, that you play around with it as an instructor a little bit before you ask your class to do that, so you can get an idea of what it's going to be saying. And then if they turn it into you, you can also read through the advice it gives and make sure that it's providing accurate information, and give that disclaimer to your students as well. I've noticed that too. So I had it generate a news release, which is a really common thing my students have to do. And then I asked it to do it again in AP style, and it did mostly perfect, but it had like 2 or 3 things that were not up to date with the current style book, or that were like a little wonky from how we would do it. And so if I were having my students do that, I would then want to see what it told them and have them correct it. And that can be another in-class exercise, is like, here's what ChatGPT said should be the edits to this paper. Do you see errors here?
Do you agree? Do you disagree? What's going on with it? Yeah.
That's what we have to do with it too, when we're using it for our own uses, research or otherwise, because otherwise if you just assume that it's correct, then those mistakes look like your mistakes now. So you have to be sure that you're making sure that any information it's sharing with you, it's actually a lot more work to me to have to go fact check all these other things too. So yeah.
You keep repeating the theme that it's not going anywhere. It reminds me of 10 years ago when smartphones really got on, and there was a big push against it in academia.
Oh yeah.
Smartphones out of class.
Yep.
Remember
Yep.
professors? They would, there were one professor at the business college years ago had a box, and he said, you have to deposit your phone in this box.
Yep. Yep.
And we've just sort of learned to adapt to it and integrate a lot of this technology into our classes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Have students doing surveys on their phone, or check in
Yeah.
when they're present or absent on their phone.
There seems to be a theme that keeps coming up in a lot of the things that you're saying, is that we just need to figure out what to do with it.
We have to start trying some things. Like,
Yeah.
right, we're gonna mess it up. Like, we're gonna do things that don't work, or we're gonna find mistakes like what we're discussing here. But if we don't start experimenting with how to integrate it, we fall behind as a university, as a unit, as an individual, and in the industries that we're working in and preparing students for. Yeah, I was thinking of that too. Like in business now, instead of thinking of it as just a distraction for workers, industries are thinking about how to use it for like, you know, you can do your performance review on your phone, or you can track your hours on your phone, or you can use it for, and some of them are kind of like invasive, and now people are tired of using their phones at work because they use it so much. So I think we're getting there here.
So just to kind of move us forward a little bit, here's, you know, editing, we're talking about that extensively. I just fed it a pretty simple sentence with a few punctuation and spelling errors, and it caught those. So depending on the level that you're working on and what type of lesson you're doing, you can, you know, use it to, like we said, talk about it. Are these corrections correct here? Could we do this in a different way? Of course we can. There's, you know, you can fix sentences in lots of different ways if you're looking at like a.
I mean, it's apparently a fan of the Oxford comma.
Yes.
And in my department,
Is
I
not.
personally am a fan, but
Right.
so I'm just saying that as an aside, but my department, we use AP style strictly. So that would be wrong for that student. So you would have to tell it in the.
In
the
AP
prompt.
style. Right.
It also wouldn't know if like someone's name was spelled incorrectly.
Right.
Interesting.
And this is just to say that like all of the things we just described, and especially like people were pointing out in the chat, like it's not so good at this still, or it's still having these errors identifying passive versus active voice, or these errors of, you know, where to put semicolons, whatever it is. Maybe not for long, right? Like, so we showed the graph before about how the performance has just skyrocketed on a number of these different sort of standardized tests that we're all familiar with. And this is true with kind of like all of the capabilities and functionalities. Like they've gotten so much stronger with the release of ChatGPT 4. So we can suspect that even, you know, us professors who are like, well, they still need us because we still really know why the semicolon goes here and not here, and the difference between passive and active voice. These things are getting better, right?
It's been 4 months. It's been 4 months.
So
like, this is the tip of the, and this is also not everything it can do. This is
Right.
this is the unleashed part of it.
4
And
months
it could very
free.
well be very little of
Yeah.
what it can possibly do
Right, 4 months free, the front-facing version that we're getting to play with and train.
in order to share our information and data as like a token. Like it's a right now it's we're just doing business with them so they can improve the products.
So this is just like a screen grab of a sort of like tutoring style conversation, right? At one point you can see that the student or the user is saying like, just tell me the answer, like stop trying to tutor me and tell me the answer. And it's saying like, no, I'm gonna try to help you understand. And then it goes through trying to help the user understand, right? So we can obviously see that that would have some sort of positive potential, especially if it's able to get things right in the way that the previous versions couldn't do as consistently.
There are potentials for uses to help assess students in classes that all make me hesitate because they're still in their infancy. But I think eventually a lot of the things that we're doing, I mean, Turnitin is using artificial intelligence to do its work. So this is going to be in the realm of tools that we have to assess student learning in the classroom. So if you use, for example, has anyone used Perusal in your classrooms? I do. It's on Canvas. It's an integrated app that you upload readings and things. Students make comments and annotations and conversations with each other about the reading. And then it has features built in for automatic grading. So, you know, you tell it how many comments people need to leave and how much time they need to engage with the reading. And it provides grades based on how they perform within those. So there are ways to use ChatGPT in similar ways to evaluate students. If you give it clear guidelines and a clear rubric, and then you input student textual responses to questions, it can assign grades. It can identify errors, which for those of you who grade reading, that can be a lot of work. But that needs to be checked by a human, by you, before you distribute that kind of thing to a student, because it's not always right. It can be great for a student to get that feedback, like preliminarily, like before they turn in a draft of a paper, for example. But that is not, I would not recommend using that as an actual way of reducing your workload at this stage.
But you could certainly, like you were saying, see a student who like, okay, my professor gave me, you know, this rubric for this assignment. Here's what I have so far based on this rubric, like what grade would I expect to get? And that could be like a pretty reasonable starting place for a student. And they're like, oh, right now I'm at a C, like what do I need to do to get into the A range?
Right, which is a lot of the time that I spend with students sometimes that feels like could be better spent elsewhere is, you know, a lot of students want pre-grading on their work, and I don't have time for pre-grading every writing assignment in the class. It's a writing class. So it's nice to have an option for students to get feedback somewhere else. I also would just mention, now that I'm thinking of it, because I'm not sure I mentioned this in the slides, or but I should have, that I personally find it ethically questionable whether an instructor should require students to utilize this under their own personal account. If you have a class account, which you could do, but then that would have to be linked to you or someone else. And that would also potentially reach capacity. You can only use your account so much to generate content. So you could do it that way to have students have access to something that's not their own. But I don't personally feel comfortable requiring my students to opt into sharing all their data in this way to build a large language model, even though I'm personally doing it. I don't feel like that's something I can necessarily make them do. The same is true of things like sharing, like creating social media accounts and things like that, even though I do have assignments in my classes that require students to build posts on different social media accounts. So think about your industry norms and whether students need to have proficiency in different things. And if they're going to need to utilize this, that may be something that over time your department is going to need to figure out a way to have. I imagine there'll be like enterprise accounts eventually. So we'll be able to utilize that to avoid making students share their personal information.
On the chat, Udaya said, has anyone asked ChatGPT if a piece of work was produced by ChatGPT? And Han said, just tried it with a brainstorm list and it says yes. So
Interesting. Yeah. It's wrong about some things. Also, the checkers are wrong about some things. Like academic papers often come up with a high probability of being produced by AI. And the reason is because we write so badly in our academic papers. Like it's always very passive voice and lengthy and like not direct and makes no sense, but it's because we're doing it according to the norms of our disciplines. That's true. So yes, it's not great with that. In terms of course evaluations, ways that a student could discuss areas for improvement with a course in a conversation that feels maybe less like they're talking to a person or less like they're talking to you and giving you feedback. So you could have a student enter a prompt that you give them or you provide for them about the class so that it could ask you questions about your satisfaction in different areas of the class in more of a conversational style. So that's something you might add to if you're interested in like redeveloping or redesigning a course and figuring out what things are working really well. And it's similar to sending out a survey or a Google form, except it's interactive. And so it gives that it can ask different types of questions depending on responses and things like that.
Okay. So we've just said a lot about student uses, and we'll say some more time, depending on time at the end. But we wanted to think a bit about how we could use ChatGPT in research, whether we're graduate students or faculty members. Go ahead. Okay, so this is a kind of list, and then we'll go through some specific examples, but thinking about ChatGPT as a potential research tool. So obviously we know it generates text, which for many of us is important in our research. It can do things like summaries. We'll say more about that in a moment. There's kind of particular tools for summarizing longer bits of text. So maybe I've got this, longer article and I want to put it in and get, a 300-word summary or something like that. So it could be a way of summarizing a lot of information really quickly. Doing literature reviews, of course, like all of this, approach with caution, but getting a starting place for literature reviews, perhaps. It makes it all up. Right. So, and this is true, like with everything, I'm going to keep saying, it's going to get better, right? ChatGPT 4 is already astronomically better than the previous iteration. I think some of the making it up problems are going to be less problems very quickly, but yes, for now, proceed with caution on things like that, but it could be a reasonable starting point. Right. Bearing in mind all of the fact checking.
So when I think of it as a potential tool for literature review, one way I've actually used it was I was invited to participate in a grant that's on a topic I know nothing about, to be a specialist in an area that I do know something about, so it's still relevant. But as far as the topic of the grant, I needed to familiarize myself very quickly with the big questions in that area. So I used it for that. It generated summaries, not citations. Citations are almost always going to be wrong, but it helped me understand like what even this grant was about in a way that was more clear to me than the statements, the narrative of the grant text. It kind of contextualized the importance of what the grant was going to do. So if you need to familiarize yourself with different fields that you're not normally working in, or debates in fields, or just the main approaches to things. So like you could ask it, you know, what are the 5 most commonly discussed ethical frameworks for reasoning through ethical questions and problems. It can tell you things like that, like big generalized topics. But I wouldn't use it I would not rely on it or use it or copy and paste it into anything that I ever use for any purpose, like beyond my helping me get up to date on something.
Okay, yeah, so some other things, exploring potential hypotheses, translation. I've seen a number, again, I'm in philosophy, I've seen a number of people putting in chunks of like historical texts and seeing if they translate them accurately, and to what extent, how they translate them. Things like data analysis, certainly administrative tasks. So things like putting things in a particular order, putting things, alphabetizing things, like, so putting in just like a list of a lot of things and saying, put this in alphabetical order, things that like, you know, might otherwise take us a lot of time, and citation generating.
You know, I've used it for a lot of things that there are functions in Excel for, but I hate Excel. So that's like the whole thing. Like Excel can do anything, but you have to know how to do the thing. Whereas in ChatGPT, you just tell it to do it and it does it. So I've done that.
Yeah, along that same lines, someone who scraped a whole bunch of HTML, fed it to ChatGPT and told it to extract like the title, the description, and that. So that way they didn't have to write the code to actually extract that data.
Yeah.
And then even told it to return it in the form. It was either JSON or XML. And they said it was pretty good, and that saved a lot of like technical.
Totally. Yeah. I've been listening to like a lot of podcast interviews where people are telling like similar stories, and they're like, this thing that would have taken me 8 hours, you know, now took me, you know, not even 1 hour.
Oh yeah. If you have a ton of programming language that you're trying to convert from one language to another, or if you're trying to identify like a tiny little error in the code, it's pretty useful for those purposes too.
Will it generate files? Like if you wanted to take.
Not yet, but it will.
So
Not yet. Wait till next week. I don't know. I just made that up. But not yet. No, but it can formulate things that look like a table that are really easy to export out yourself by copying and pasting them into a spreadsheet.
Yeah, and then some of the other apps that are sort of connected. So these are just 2, but there's one called File Chat and one called Humata, I guess is how you say it. They're PDF readers though, so you could upload a PDF, say like a journal article, and get a summary of it. The second one will even like highlight relevant bits of the text. So it can give you a summary. You can ask for clarification, or like where in the text does it explain this concept or make this argument, and it'll tell you on this page and highlight it for you. So you could think of how our students would use that for all of the things that we assign them to read. But you could also, as a research tool, think about if we're trying to remember where in a PDF a particular argument is made out of a 100-page PDF. Well, it can help us locate that.
Yeah. In the chat, it says that in this morning's Washington Post, there's an article about ChatGPT writing whole papers and getting them published.
Yeah. There's been a lot of this and a lot of
I saw that like all the self-publishing on Amazon went up like some huge percentage exponentially because people are self-publishing things that they're writing
whole books
with ChatGPT.
Yeah, I saw there's a couple of companies that are like not accepting submissions because they just had such a huge spike in submissions.
Yeah, I'm sure all kinds of like creative, like literary journals and things like that. You can imagine like places that publish poetry or something like that. I'm sure, especially if they pay for those poems. I could imagine a lot of people using this and sending that off as if it's original content. And then this is certainly relevant for the grad students, but there are other uses that are sort of connected to academia that aren't necessarily about research per se, but might be connected to academia in terms of things pertaining to the job search and the job application and sort of market process, certainly interview prep. I think there's some slides about this in a moment, but doing things like having sort of like a mock interview or like, these are my research interests, how could I frame this for this particular job? Those kind of things.
Yeah. So this is an example, I'm not in microbiology, I just said that to be inclusive, I don't know. So I'm applying for a postdoc research fellowship in microbiology, generate an outline for a cover letter. So I wanted to show how to use it to like just figure out what should even go in that kind of a document. So that's the first example. And this is not the whole response. It gave me like 2 other things, but I just cut it off because the point here, I just wanted to show you how you can create that outline. But see, that's really generic. Like you're applying for a postdoc, that you can input whatever text in the prompt you want. So the next slide, Richard, would you go to the next one? I copied and pasted, I found this on Google. I don't know if this is a good postdoc in microbiology, but I found one, a job description for an open postdoc in microbiology, I think, I'm guessing. Well, it says synthetic, I don't know, it says biological. Anyway, I copy and pasted all of the language. This is cut off, but I included the entire ad. And then I asked it to help me create the same thing. So this is the same response that is still an outline, but this time now it's telling me when I can mention different aspects of what they're looking for. And so that's even more useful. So it's kind of like garbage in, garbage out, just like any other automated tool. Whatever you put in will make whatever comes out more specific or more useful or less useful. And so if you ask for just a cover letter, that's the same formula that every other student's going to be submitting for that application. And I promise you that they're going to get tired of seeing it. Like they're going to recognize that you used a tool, whether the tool was like the professor is in, which was the website that everyone was using when I was applying for jobs, and following her advice exactly, which is very formulaic, or if you're using this, it'll be a similar formula. But this way, if you tell it this, so what I didn't do here, but if I would have done, if I was actually trying to do this for real, is I would also tell it about myself. Like if I'm going to write a cover letter, I want it to be personalized as much as possible. It should not sound generic, like I send it to every single postdoc. It should sound like I'm writing it because I want that job. And so I would include that in the prompt. I would say, here's all of my background and experience and why I want this job. Here's why I think this would be a great job. And then it can help you generate it. Now, guess what? You're doing a lot of the work by telling it all the things in the prompt, because if you can articulate why you want that job and why you'd be good at that job,
Just write the cover letter.
write the cover letter. No, but you're writing a cover letter. That's kind of like writing a cover letter. This is helping you organize it and helping you think through how to present those things to make them relevant to this specific position. And if you have to apply for 50 jobs, which you may, that can be amazing. Like that can be so helpful to have a tool that just helps you do some of that effort and work.
Well, in some ways, it sounds like the old adage, like sunlight's the best disinfectant. So if it's writing your cover letter, that's whatever, but it can't interview for you.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if you're sitting face to face next to someone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
Oh,
there's
yeah.
certain things, it's easy to say, well, ChatGPT will never do this. And I don't know that I would say it never would,
Yeah.
but it'll be a long time before it can actually do a job interview face to face for you.
Yeah. Well, if it's really, really fast, you could have like an earbud
Yeah.
and voice
Yeah.
to text. But yeah, no, I mean, that's more work than it's worth, right? Like this is a great tool to prepare for that. So you can put in the same prompt, like this is the position I'm applying for. I would like you to pretend to be the director that's hiring for that position. And I'd like you to interview me about my sets of qualifications and then play around with that a few times. I watched the terrible show Rehearsal yesterday. Have any of you seen that show? It's terrible and I don't recommend it. I mean, I don't know what it is. But it's a show about like walking through all the possible situations in a social interaction before you have it. It's also sort of a comedy, but I don't know what it is. And I'm not recommending it right now. I'm just saying it's a great way to rehearse possibilities. So you could tell it to be an interviewer who is going to shut you down at every stage and cut you off and tell you why you should be doing something differently, or like mansplaining to you, or whatever you want to tell it, and it can do that for you. And so you can try it where it's really inquisitive and wants to know all the details, or where it's really dismissive, or where it feels like they're just doing this to check off a box and they've already filled the position, like, and practice those different ways of responding, because that's a really useful skill to be able to kind of prep yourself mentally and run through that as a practice, and then read it out loud as you're doing it, and then it'll be even more helpful.
And if I might just add, like that could be really important in terms of equity too, because like, you know, if you think about being on the job market, you might think there are some institutions where the grad students are being prepared for the job market, and they're getting a lot of support and a lot of interview prep and things like that. And there might be other places where people aren't receiving the same degree of of preparation, and faculty members are busy. It's hard to hold a lot of mock interviews, all those things. So you can see this as being something that could kind of level the playing field. If there are some grad students who are really being prepped for interviews and for the job market, and there are some grad students who really aren't, then at least this is an opportunity to simulate some of that interview environment. Like, pretend you're a really mean professor who's really skeptical about my research project, and having the experience of dialoguing with that kind of character could be incredibly beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good way to use it. So this one, you can go back to the one before. So I'm actually applying for a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. It's for, not of, but I'm not applying for this particular grant, and I've already written my proposal, so I felt okay doing this today. But what I did was I went and I looked at the 5 that they awarded last year, and I copied and pasted the descriptions of the winning projects into this, and I asked it to analyze the language in those and tell me what might be a good project to propose. Now, this wouldn't work in this actual case because they changed their funding priorities this year. So you can't actually do that with this example, but it can help you see how the projects they're funding align with what they state their goals are. If you see their goals state that they want to include, certain things, and then they never actually do that in their funding, pay attention to if their goals are changing, because in this case, it doesn't show a lot of qualitative work because they didn't fund that before, but now they do. And so it'll be different, but this actually did a pretty good job when I input all of the project descriptions at pulling out the common themes. So it was able to say they seem to be funding a lot of long-term quantitative projects that focus on these particular topics. So I think I have that slide. Yeah, so it says, here's an idea of what you could propose. It's clear that they're interested in supporting research on the value of impact of arts, that it's particularly supported in these 3 areas. So I knew that because I had read about what they were doing, and that is actually what they were doing. But the large scale quantitative and longitudinal, that I knew that they did fund those, but I didn't know that that was pretty much what they were only funding at that point. So that was interesting. And then it did come up with questions that I could propose in the same format as the other descriptions and how I might do that. Now, for me to use this in a way that would actually be helpful for me, it would need to be specific to my area. So I would want the prompt to be much more specific. I would want to say here are the things that I'm interested in studying. How can I propose that in a way that appeals to the funding priorities of this particular grant institution? And that could, that, especially if you're working in a field where funding is either super competitive or really uncommon. Grant funding for the humanities and social sciences can be really uncommon. This can be a really great tool to help you figure out how to fit what you're doing into the framework of what they're wanting.
And we just talked about this, so we don't have to stick on this for too long, but this was just this was very generic. And again, we've been saying, obviously you're going to get more specific and tailored feedback, the more kind of specific the input prompt is. But this just says, right, I have a job interview for a tenure track job in a sociology department at an R1 university, and this would be the job breakdown. What would be some sample interview questions? And it gives some, which is already can be incredibly helpful. Yes, you could maybe find these kinds of questions on Google with the right questions, but
and 5 years ago when I was on the job market, this is the kind of work I was doing, except I was Googling it and finding examples on different sites and then amalgamating it all into a document and printing it off to study on the airplane as I flew for an interview. And so this is a way of kind of doing some of that work in a different way.
Yeah. And then a follow-up, thanks ChatGPT, that's helpful, but could you actually simulate a sort of 15-minute first round interview for that job I just described? And it kind of gives one. You could also do that yourself in the kind of conversational way where they play interviewer and you play interviewee. So there's different sort of iterations of what that could look like, but it could be invaluable for people preparing for academic job interviews or other job interviews. Okay, so given that conversation, clearly, right, we're all in some ways connected to academia as grad students or as professors. It seems like there are academic uses at all levels, right? So there's the potential to be a study tool for students, certainly to think of creative classroom exercises, like the example of, having it analyze a film and then having a conversation about what values it seems to have come out of that, of its analysis, writing assistance and tutoring, and then also research assistance and things like job market and interview prep. But, and some of these things have come up.
What's the comment there? I can't see that
sorry.
in here.
There's a conversation going on
Oh.
about a prompt. I asked ChatGPT to write a 250 word essay on global warming and tell me the authors who contributed to the information
Oh.
and
Oh.
information on that. And here's the
Yeah.
citations.
So I had a whole fight with ChatGPT because I asked it basically my own research questions for my dissertation, which I wrote in 2015. And I asked it those questions and I gave it no other information. And it came back with basically the abstract for my dissertation. So then I asked it what sources it used to compile that. And it gave me like the 5 leading scholars in the field that are none of them me and none of them have written on that topic, but they've written on things around that topic. And I was super mad. I was like, dude, like if you're going to use my work, it's fine because you're obviously using everyone's work. But like if you're not citing it, isn't that plagiarism? And it was like, I can't plagiarize. I have as an AI, I have no potential for intent. And I'm like, my students plagiarize without intending to all the time. So you can fight with it too. It's also fun, a good stress reliever, but that's a major limitation. Like it either makes up the source or you're going to have to go read that whole source anyway to make sure that that source said what it said and you're not misrepresenting it. So it can help you find who the well-known writers are in that area if you're learning about new areas, but it will, they were all men too. That's just the other thing I was yelling at about, just so you know. Because there were very few women working on the topic I was working on, and I was like, come on, like, throw me a bone. But no, anyway. So then it asked me to correct it and updated its information, and I wouldn't do it. I'm not helping you.
Anyhow, so a number of these have come up as we've been going. So clearly, we just talked about, some potential uses, but we would be remiss not to flag that these raise a number of sort of ethical concerns for things like academic integrity, right? Certainly, we started with like all the academic panic when this first released was student plagiarism, and like, sure, that is a concern among many. So is research, failures of academic integrity on the research end. And also this came up with the question about, at what point is it still mine? Like how much can I use ChatGPT and still say this is my original content? So that raises some sort of ethical questions and challenges. But we've sort of put here some things that it seems at least raise concerns about academic integrity, authenticity, originality, right? So if I input some of my research and have it come up with the abstract, is that an ethical gray area? Or if I have it write an introduction based on what I've input, if I give it one of my research papers and say, can you write a short blog for my professional blog based on this, or parts of grant proposals or conference panel proposals, which we said before the mic was on, we had done as a rhetorical strategy, but we submitted a AI generated panel proposal to go talk about AI. But you can imagine people doing that with not as a rhetorical strategy, but as a trying to quickly get out panel proposals and things
We
like that.
indicated on our proposal that it was
Yeah.
generated by ChatGPT. So
Or
we cited
even-
our sources.
Yeah, things like cover letters or other application materials. So all of these things, of course, raise some of those ethical concerns.
Yeah. There are other ethical concerns too, and we'll talk more about these on Friday if you're interested in joining that Zoom or just want to talk with us more about them. But as writing instructors, we're all very concerned about like what skill are we sacrificing if we give up the effort that it takes, the cognitive effort and the creative process and the critical thinking that it takes to compose any of these documents ourselves. So it's like Socrates saying that once people start writing, they're going to forget how to remember things because they don't have to anymore. And that's like me being that person who's saying, if we use this to write for us, we're going to forget how to write. And I think that to some extent, I'm less concerned about like us actually forgetting how to write well, as I am about us forgetting or losing the skill to creatively think through a problem and articulate it to someone else. Which is really what writing is about. It's about organizing and communicating. And so if we lose that ability, then we lose a lot of other things too in our social world and the dynamics of what society and our lives are really about. So that's a whole other conversation, but we'll talk more about these other things as well on Friday.
With our last little bit of time, we wanted, and this has been going on throughout, which is great, but we wanted to provide an opportunity for people in the room and on Zoom to kind of brainstorm with us. So we just said, right, there's a number of sort of ethical challenges that we're trying to balance with the kind of productive potential of using ChatGPT as a tool in teaching and research. So we want to have you all think with us, how can we sort of leverage what this thing can do as a tool while also trying to respect and sort of keep up certain values that we seem to have, including presumably academic honesty and integrity, things like transparency, things like trust, right? So, right, is the news that I'm reading or the essays or the academic articles that I'm reading, are they written by AI or by a human? Do I care about that? And then critical thinking and the ability to sort of communicate, as Rosemary was just saying.
So you want to put on the next slide, thinking in terms of teaching. So if you are either a student or an instructor, you might think through some of these with us. In your discipline, specific to the kinds of skills that your students need to learn in your discipline, how might your discipline utilize this tool for an introductory course in the field? I'm actually teaching an introductory course in our field next semester that I'm trying to revise. So this is a really salient question for me because I've only taught this course once and it was during COVID, so it's different. So I've never taught it on the scale. You know, there's 100 students all trying to learn the foundations, and also it's also a little bit of a sales pitch to get them to want to be in the major. So like, how might you utilize in your disciplines this text? Would it be like for an intro course for you? Would that be like for introductory business majors, you think?
I think the one introduction, a lot of the introduction to what I've been learning from is Excel, and then using those capabilities in other softwares.
Yeah.
So Excel tutorials.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, any kind of a tutorial on something that's been around for a long time and that there's a lot of content on the internet about like that. Excel would be great. You couldn't really use it for a tutorial on some new software or some lesser known enterprise software, for example, but Excel, that content is everywhere. And so that would be a great use of it. And you could also ask it questions like, if I wanted to do this, how would I do it? What buttons and what functions can I use?
Yeah, I cheated for an Excel class that one of my students here on this.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doing services for it.
Oh, yeah. Or I mean, I like to do like creative assignments. And sometimes they're just bonus assignments because they're just for fun. I think they're fun. Students probably don't, but when that could be something like that, like, you know, come up with some new ways to use this to learn Excel functions, you know, and have students come up with some ideas. They're amazing and resourceful. What is this? Oh, that's about the references. Yeah.
So on your last slide, you referenced critical thinking, and I think that's like woven through all of this, and it's really an opportunity. It gives an opportunity to think about, okay, what do I know about this? How has this been generated, and what sorts of biases have been woven into it? So it's really not like an oracle, like an answer giver, but an opportunity for us to reflect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we've all talked about this some, but in terms of like, if we think on the sort of educator side, part of our role is like preparing our students for like what future society and future jobs are really going to look like. It seems like being able to fact check the outputs of like AI generated content is going to be a huge part of a lot of jobs, whether it's fact checking the outputs of data analysis it did for a science paper, or fact checking news articles that were generated by it, or whatever it is. So training our students to be able to do that, right? To be like, what biases are in this? What values are being sort of reflected in the outcome of this? Or is it even accurate, right? I think all of those kind of things are ways we can teach critical thinking and sort of support critical thinking, and also in a way that's connected to like, this is going to be out in the world, the job market you're going to enter.
Right, that prep for real world use. Yeah. I mean, I've been talking with a friend of mine who works at a PR firm. She's CEO of a PR firm in Tulsa that takes a lot of our students as interns, and a lot of them end up getting jobs there. We were talking, I actually told her about it, and I keep like ruining people's lives by telling them about it. I told Richard about it, and then I told her about it. She's like, this is when it first came out. She hadn't heard of it. And then when I showed her how it could generate a blog post with, you know, certain SEO keywords and like on a certain topic in a certain format, in a matter of seconds, she told me that it takes somebody working for her, you know, a couple weeks to put together content, at least a week to write a single blog post, but several weeks to make like the plan for content and develop like what's gonna, like a trajectory and scaffold the kind of content that they would post in blogs. And this can do that in seconds. And so in terms of saving time for content that's if you've ever written for SEO, you know that writing is formulaic and is strategic and impersonal, and being able to do that in a quicker way gives a huge competitive advantage in some industries. Most social media content is stuff that's written weeks in advance and then just automatically posted. So you can set all that stuff up and integrate that stuff, and it still needs a person that can make sure it's correct and make sure it's appropriate and make sure it's done well. And
So maybe a person and not a
a
team of
person,
people,
yeah.
which is scary and sad. This friend of Rosemary's that owns the PR firm and I were sitting next to
Wow.
each other on a panel, and it was like the business owner and the ethicist sitting next to each other. And I was like,
It's like the start of a joke, right?
yeah, no, really, like an owner of a PR firm and an ethicist walk into a bar, and but the point was like, this certainly can be used to increase efficiency and therefore profit if you're a business owner, particularly a business owner whose business relies on content generation, but also like there are these ethical concerns clearly, and how do we balance certain values that we seem to have, trust, transparency, human creativity, with our interests in a capitalist society in efficiency and productivity and
I
profit.
wonder if in the future there will be like a verification you can get that says this content was written by a real person, and then like
Yeah.
you get a little star on your website or something,
Yeah.
and like books and poems and music that comes out will have to be like
Yeah.
authenticated.
But raises the further values question
Yeah.
that the three of
Yeah.
us talk about often.
people
Like, do people care about that? If what I like is having lots of content to stream on Netflix, or lots of songs to hear on Spotify, or lots of things to look at, like, do I care? I care, but I might be in a dwindling few.
Thank you very much for coming. I know some of you do have to go. You stuck with us for a long time. I have an idea for a course I'm teaching, which is a theory-based ethics course. It's a required course for our major. It's ethics of communication. They're gonna have every week they have different articles that they read and annotate and perusal as a group, and then we discuss those things. So one of them is a fake article written by ChatGPT and surreptitiously put in there among the others to look real. That's a whole thing. So there's lots of ways you can kind of like determine if your students are able to spot the difference. Like maybe in your graduate students, like, are they able to critically look at it and say something's off here without you telling them? Be sure you tell them, but like after.
Which connects to the point about like supporting critical thinking though, and like digital literacy, which is going to become increasingly important in this environment where there's quick content generation, which means the capacity to exploit that for misinformation, propaganda, all of those things goes through the roof. And people already have a hard time telling like what's satire or what's like, malicious fake news or those kind of things from like what's actually happening in the world, to the point that like I talk to other people and you can tell they have no way to disambiguate between those things. And so that problem's only going to get worse when people can manipulate things like this to output tons of fake information that looks incredibly convincing. So one strategy for increasing digital literacy is helping students like what of these things are real and how do we know, how can we tell, and trying to cultivate strategies for being able to pinpoint differences between those things.
I gotta get going, but I just want to ask, have you guys seen the movie Her?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Her.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
And watch it, it's
Yeah.
10 years old, but
Yeah.
it is shocking how
Yes.
spot on, like absolutely spot on it is with ChatGPT
Mhm.
and the ethical considerations of today's world, like you'd be shocked.
Yeah, no, that's like
Oh.
all of those, yeah, not all of them, but there's so many like dystopian types of films and books
Yeah.
about technology
Yeah.
that really well describe the world we actually live in. And so we have to figure out how to navigate that, because it's not gonna happen. Thank you for
Thank you so
coming.
much.
It's good to see
I
you.
just heard a tech commentator say that on a podcast that they just rewatched Her and they were like, oh my God, like,
Yeah. How did
watching
they
it,
know?
watching it in this context where there's like Microsoft's like Sydney, like Microsoft's version of this, and like Sydney's exchange with Kevin Roose from the New York Times, and like seeing that and then thinking about Her in that context is, yeah, I don't know if I can even watch the film right now.
Yeah, too much.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Somebody said in the chat, Her was a great movie. So there's a secondary recommendation for folks who have not seen it yet.
All right, cool.
the last
Cool,
one.
cool, cool. Yeah,
And then the last one, if anybody imagines that they'll utilize it in their research, do you want to say how you imagine implementing this into research?
you know what's really good at is like if you have written a manuscript, your dissertation, for example, and you want to publish it as chapters and you need to change each chapter for different journal requirements, or just shorten it, because a lot of the time a chapter of a dissertation needs to be cut down to half of what you said. It's really good at that. So there's just a little tip from me. I think cutting my precious words is one of the most painful
I'm terrible at it.
processes. I need them all. Brainstorming ideas, possible approaches to solve a problem. Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of us are working in areas where we're asked to help with things, like help with problems that exist, and we need to take our methodological and theoretical toolkits to bear on those things, and this is a great way to figure out how to make those connections. Anything else? All right, well, we want to end with a caution again, just because like we are not trying to unloose something here that we cannot put back. That's Pandora's box situation happening. But we hope that by talking about it, that you'll take these conversations back to your departments, because this is obviously just the surface of what it might do. It's not super specific enough for any of you to directly implement, but you can take this discussion back. Be sure that your faculty members and your students are talking about this, because in so many ways, not talking about it is more risky for the future of what we're going to be doing here in the university and in industry than figuring it out now and trying to figure out what to do now moving forward.
It won't be hidden from students for long if it's hidden from any of them still. So
And educate
that approach
them,
doesn't work.
educating them on the how to navigate it in a media literacy framework is relevant across disciplines.
San said, I think we should allow AI use in all of our classrooms, or all of our classes, and allow more hands-on practice in labs and more discussion groups.
Good. Yeah.
I think a lot of classes will be moving that way, but it's really difficult.
Yeah.
And if your whole point is teaching students to write, that's where there's a big challenge for three of us, I think, and yours is writing and thinking. We're also writing and thinking, but you know, writing and structure of writing and the work of writing can be difficult. Yeah, you can't make an egg out of an omelet. That's
Moving back.
like, that should have been the title of this presentation.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Like, no, the eggs are done. So as disciplines, as you know, if you're on a curriculum committee or anything, if you're thinking about the future of your program or your industry or your own job trajectory, and you're not thinking about this, I think you're going to be wishing you could go back.
Snowballs already going down the
plan
hill.
and implement and discuss. I think transparency is everything. So I think everyone needs to know how everyone else is navigating this issue for it to be seemingly as close to fair as possible.
Shannon's comment in the chat echoes what the last quote is on that we were going to end our presentation with. This is from Kevin Roos, but he says with respect to this particular context is about teaching and whether or not we should be banning it in classrooms, which is precisely what Hassan had said in the chat we shouldn't be doing. So Kevin Roos agrees, and he says, instead of starting an endless game of whack-a-mole against an ever-expanding army of AI chatbots, here's a suggestion. Schools should treat ChatGPT the way they treat calculators, imperfect analogy, but allowing it for some assignments, but not others. And assuming that unless students are being supervised in person all of the time with their devices totally out of sight and view, they're probably using one. And I would say that that's probably going to continue to be true. And so instead of like trying to run around banning it and preventing it, which we will not do effectively and would take all of our time and energy, how do we work with it productively? So evolving conversation. Yeah.
The movie didn't they use like
Yeah.
their work is being replaced, they learning how to use
Yeah,
that
yeah.
machine and how to
Yeah, so
exactly.
there are a lot of media theorists
That's a great-
that feel like, you know, we have hit a lot of these big moments in history. You can look at them through the lens of communication revolutions and media revolutions, and they tended to be farther spaced out, and then things snowball. And so, you know, we had the printing press, then we had the electronic revolution, then we had the digital revolution, and now this is a new twist in that. So I mean, I see this as affecting everything else, which is what makes it a media revolution. And I think if we don't figure out how to work with it, I mean, that'd be like, can you imagine any of your industries pretending like the internet wasn't a thing and just trying to go ahead and do things however it was done pre-internet?
Yeah.
I mean, we can't, like, it's not feasible.
Some people in my discipline.
And newspapers across the country are going out of business because not only because of that reason, but failure to be able to adapt the product to the communication environment is the death knell for a lot of industries. So it's really important to be in the forefront of thinking through how to affect you and your industry and your career and your plans. I sound like I'm giving you a talk about like insurance planning or something for like life insurance policies, but yeah, maybe a little.
So I had an interesting experience just last week. I was on an online discussion board and someone asked for all of the songs that a particular band had written that mentioned a woman's name.
Oh.
And as ChatGPT, and it made up most of them, or it
Brilliant.
like caught a word that wasn't actually a name.
Uh-huh.
And then a few days later, it asked Bing's chatbot that, and Bing said, I found this list on the internet, and it was,
Which was worse from
yeah, so
ChatGPT.
it's kind of like a degradation of the feedback loop and like how to generate more content. So I'm just like
Yeah,
interested
no.
to get my thoughts.
And especially with like, with Bing's being like integrated with the internet, right? And being connected to a search engine, then that like exacerbates that problem to
Oh,
some extent.
right. So is
In a way
like-
that ChatGPT is not.
Okay, so that's like one of the main differences between the two. Okay.
For now, yeah. I think everything we say about ChatGPT, it's like for today.
Or maybe not even this morning, yesterday
Yeah.
when we were checking, like today, I don't know.
So somebody said in the,
Those silly horseless carriages will never take on.
Never repent
Yeah.
since,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, here we are. So I'm glad you all came and that you're interested. Please, here's our email addresses. Feel free to, like, we'd love to chat. This is what we're working on and thinking about right now. We're really interested in how this is going to play out in other disciplines besides our very writing intensive one. So we'd love to hear more from any of you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Great weekend. Thank you all for coming.